What is the big deal about mouth breathing, and why is nasal breathing such an important piece of our personal infection control? And that is definitely because of this particular molecule, nitric oxide. It was deemed to be the molecule of the year in 1992. I've also seen a lot of action in the scientific research looking at nitric oxide versus viruses and versus viral infection. We are in a very peculiar time right now with respect to our environment, our personal environment, because of this COVID-19 problem. We are all at home. Today is April 7th, 2020, and many of us haven't left our own building for quite some time because of this virus. The virus is only about 6 months old, so it's hard to know exactly how this virus is going to be reacting under different circumstances, but we do have some idea of how viruses of this type react under certain circumstances. So what we have is a way to fight this virus from the entrance point in the sinuses. Nitric oxide is responsible for a lot of different things throughout the body. It is made in other places of the body, but for our purposes, we're going to be talking about nitric oxide in the sinuses. It's responsible for vasodilation and oxygenation, even phagocytosis, and we're going to explore a tiny bit into how it reacts directly against the enveloped viruses or enveloped viruses. The sinus epithelium synthesizes nitric oxide continuously, and it is then released in a bolus. Not that all of the cells that make the nitric oxide release it all at once as a giant bolus, but each cell then just kicks it out just a little bit at a time so that there's always something happening. You can increase the release of nitric oxide by vibrations. We can do that in a couple of different ways. The easiest way is to hum. So everybody hum. Right? Isn't that fun? You can whistle while you work, or you can hum while you work and then get a little extra nitric oxide. So how does nitric oxide play a role in viral infections? This was a paper here from the Journal of Virology, and they talk about how nitric oxide reacts with the proteins on the viruses and kind of melts them down or destroys them in some way. So, so long as the nitric oxide gets onto the virus itself, it's a pretty good killer. So breathing with your mouth closed is really important. In this time where we're that we're very vulnerable, in the United States, most people don't wear masks out and about unless you are undergoing chemotherapy. Other parts of the world, masks are very common, but we've been having a lot of problems with respect to mouth breathing and not using the nose and bypassing this nitric oxide potential for our own health. Nitric oxide has been looked at and studied under a bunch of different viruses. So where it says ND over here in the second column, it's no data. So we have quite a few instances to reflect back and say, well, nitric oxide was helpful against this virus and against that virus. So we have to really think about this whole sinus situation and the nitric oxide situation in the context of the craniofacial respiratory complex. So all of this starts there. I'm sorry this picture of the baby has their mouth open, but this was the best picture I found of the craniofacial respiratory complex. You can see that if the respiratory complex in behind the face really is really helping to structure the shape of the face. If you don't talk about the respiratory complex, the upper respiratory complex, in conjunction with the face and the cranium, you were missing a lot of the whole problem and the whole solution. We've known this was a study since 1984, published in 1984 in the American Journal of Orthodontics, and that study is kind of being looked at now as a pivotal study in proving that mouth breathing is detrimental to the whole craniofacial respiratory complex. These animals, primates, were asked to wear did you hear me say how pleasant that was? They were asked to wear something in their nostrils to block them from breathing nasally. And within 18 months, there were structural changes in these primates, in these growing primates, that were not able to overcome. You can see here there's an end-to-end bite here. There's crowding. The lower jaw is forward and down. The tongue is pushed forward, all in an effort to get the face out of the way for the tongue to be able to get out of the way and get oxygen to these primates. So in this third picture here, you can see the obstruction was already removed. And in the middle picture here, we can see that the teeth are so crowded. This is uncommon in any animals other than humans to see teeth crowding. Unless, of course, you're raising dogs where it's desirable to have the dog with a pushed-in face. This is the human equivalent. We see people who mouth breathe since childhood have tired eyes. They may have a crooked nose. Their chin may be receding. Their face is narrow. They usually have forward head posture. Forward head posture can be problematic or not, but in the future, it makes it more and more difficult for these people to stand. This forward head posture in a 70 or 80-year-old person can contribute to falling. So it's best that we get to these problems as soon as possible, even in a world without viruses. And we see these changes accumulating in infants. We've known since West and Price that poor diet contributes to facial structure changes that contribute to tooth crowding. And so we also know that we have mirror neurons in the brain that when children watch their parents breathe with their mouth open, they think that's normal. So the sooner we get to these issues, the better off all of our populations are going to be. We also know that not only do teeth get crowded and do we have dental changes, we know that people that breathe through their mouth have sinuses that stop growing. There's really no way to re-stimulate the growth of the sinuses. So for instance, a mouth-breathing child may learn how to breathe with their nose later, but their sinuses may have stopped at the age of 12 at that size. So how is a person to overcome that problem as an adult? It makes it very, very difficult. So getting again to this problem at the earliest stages is really important and makes it easier for everyone to live healthfully. This study is probably the biggest pieces of information here, showed that 80% of mouth breathing children had enlarged adenoids. They had sinus infections. They had idiopathic deviated nasal septums. They had inferior, they had hypertrophied inferior concha. They had all kinds of problems that were associated with mouth breathing. Breathing takes place in the diaphragm. So posture becomes even more important when we're talking about breathing, and particularly nasal breathing. When the diaphragm contracts, it goes down and it drags air in through the sinuses or the mouth, wherever the resistance is the least, and drags the air down into the lungs. So it's not that the chest expands, those are secondary muscles. It's not that the shoulders go up, that's a separate issue. It's all about the diaphragm. We can get breathing happening without the diaphragm intervening, but it's not perfect. It's not even close to perfect. So we need to get that diaphragmatic breathing going, and that's very difficult in a slouched position. That contraction sets the sinus flow rate. And that is all regulated by the brain. There are certain parts of the brain that measure the different gases that accumulate in the bloodstream, and that's what fires the diaphragm to contract. So these are just two generic kind of images that I got from Google Images, looking at or showing you that the breathing center is in a pretty protected part of the brain. It's in the pons, and it kind of goes down into the medulla oblongata. And you can see here in this picture on the left that there are peripheral chemoreceptors that trigger this area in the medulla. And all of those things together are mostly looking at the balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen in the blood. And that's what triggers the breathing. But we need to do all of that through the nose. So let's take a look at the sinus system for just a second and think about what the sinuses are and where they are. You can see the healthy sinuses there on the left, and the inflamed sinuses or full sinuses on the right. There's excess mucus, there's inflammation, there's all kinds of ways that the body's reaction to whatever is happening has been interfering with the amount of air that's able to even go through the sinuses. So we need to get that all relieved. We need to reduce the swelling. We need to get rid of the excessive mucus. Mucus is there on purpose. Mucus has to be there as part of a functioning system. And nitric oxide is made in the cells right below all of that mucus. So we have to keep the mucus flowing so that the nitric oxide can be released. We have the oral cavity here with, thankfully, the lips are closed here, and we can see that the air has to go through the external and then the internal nares into the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and down into the trachea. I like this picture because it also shows and highlights the auditory tube or the eustachian tube. And you can see here that it's kind of interacts with the back part of the sinuses on this side view. So this is why some of the studies that looked at xylitol nasal spray has effect on ear infections, because this very close reaction right here. So this is a pretty comprehensive paper here that was published in 2016 called Sinusology. And they talked a lot about nitric oxide as well. So this is how nitric oxide is made. We need to have amino acids. We need to have all of these different components in order for those cells to make the nitric oxide. The nitric oxide is also triggered by inflammatory cytokines, and we can really exploit this whole system by making sure that we're breathing through the nose at all times. Breathing through the mouth has really detrimental effects throughout the structure in a child and later on in your overall health and being exposed to viruses and bacteria. So how do we make sure that the sinuses don't have an overaccumulation of mucus? How they don't have the feature of having all of that inflammation there? How can we get the biggest sinus volume as possible? We can do that by making sure that the flow of mucus is continuously moving. We have cilia in the sinus system that moves the mucus, that traps the bacteria and viruses, traps the pollen, traps the dirt in the air, all of that kind of stuff, and keeps it sweeping towards the back and down into the stomach eventually. And that's called the mucociliary elevator. So in order for that to work right, though, you have to have actual flowing mucus. One way to keep your mucus flowing is to keep hydrated. Now, in Wisconsin, I just turned even the furnace on today. We have a furnace, and it's very, very cold here in the winter, and that warmed air is often very, very dry. There are parts of the country that are in a desert situation where the atmosphere is just dry, and it makes it really hard for the mucus to stay flowing. Once that mucus is dried up in there, the cilia kind of are trapped in this dried up mucus, and it doesn't work very effectively at trapping the bacteria, trapping the virus, all of that stuff. So we need to keep that very, very moisturized and flowing. One of the ways to do that is to use a sinus spray or a nasal spray that is based in a saline solution. Saline solutions over time, though, also dry out those tissues. So using something that has an attractor for moisture in the air is very helpful. One of those is xylitol. Xylitol attracts moisture to it, which is why they use it in a lot of different, even cosmetics. Xylitol ingested has been studied on influenza A virus infections and has been shown to be effective. You don't have to eat a lot of xylitol. This is still in the mouse study stage. You know, I have to just kind of comment on the mouse study stage in that sometimes these researchers just decide, hey, let's try this, and they find some money, they get some backing, they prove their concept, and then maybe they lose interest. So we don't see a lot of studies in humans with xylitol. We do have studies of xylitol in humans, but they don't always look at something like influenza A. There's no reason to not use xylitol, and there are plenty of reasons to use it. This was another study looking at xylitol in mice, and specifically at a respiratory virus. So we've seen that that xylitol is helpful against those viruses. There are a bunch of different theories as to exactly how that works, but it works. So there you go. So really chewing xylitol chewing gum or using it as a nasal spray has been very helpful. We have some studies coming out looking at xylitol nasal spray in chronic rhinosinusitis. And we also have a study that was, you can ask me for this study. I don't remember that I put it in here, but it showed that the sinus volume improved dramatically. It was over 30% after habitual use of xylitol nasal spray. So this slide still says nasal spray. It is really about nasal irrigation. And what this study showed was a significant reduction in sinus scores. So people fill out these forms and ask, you know, how much, I don't know, snot. I'm going to go and say snot. How much mucus they have in their sinuses. And after using a nasal irrigator with xylitol in it, they found that we had statistically significant differences between the scores, and all the scores reduced. More importantly for our conversation right now, though, is that concentrations of nitric oxide were increased significantly in the people that had been using this xylitol irrigation. So removing the irritants, keeping the mucus flowing, and reducing the swelling eventually, because everything else is out of there, we find that we have more nitric oxide being made in the sinuses, and that can only lead to a more healthful person. So what we've shown so far is that we have this kind of a photo here, this kind of an image, but what we've done over the last 150 years or so is we've decreased the size of the sinuses because we've decreased the size of the craniofacial respiratory complex. So the whole thing has been shrinking. So we need more than ever to be sure that those sinuses are clear and that we can use the sinuses to breathe and get rid of that mucus. Also, to use xylitol in a dietary way. Clear has a large repertoire of xylitol products. When we're talking about mouth breathing, we're also talking about an increased incidence in caries. So using a xylitol chewing gum can not only stimulate saliva, it can alter the bacterial components of the oral biofilm. So using a xylitol-based nasal spray can also be very effective at reducing sinus infections, ear infections, and infections that accumulate on dental enamel. So nitric oxide has been shown in this study here. This one was from 2004, and it looked at nitric oxide on SARS, which is a cousin of the COVID-19, and found that it was very effective on that envelope, as we mentioned earlier. It kind of broke everything down. So the more that we can breathe in through the nose, the better off we're going to be. That's how this virus is even getting into the body. It's on droplets and on aerosolized moisture bits that come from the mouth when you're talking. In dentistry, we're very sensitive to that because we create a lot of aerosols in our practice. So using nitric oxide for health as it's made in the body is awesome. There are some mechanical things that you can do to increase the size of the nose effectively so that you can get more air in through that way. RhinoMed has a variety of applicators that can help to expand the nose. Breathe Right nasal strips can also be helpful. I found for myself that they leave some glue on my face that I'm not crazy about. So using something inside the nose might be more helpful. There are other nasal sprays. This one here in the center has silver in it. And then this neti stick is kind of cool. It has essential oils in there. You put it up into the nose and just inhale, and you can just feel everything like opening wide up. So using that before bed is a good thing to do, and using a xylitol nasal spray is also very good right before bed, especially if you know that you snore or you know that you breathe with your mouth open when you're sleeping. I remember very vividly as a child dreaming or being afraid of insects crawling into my mouth while I was asleep, because I knew I slept with my mouth open and nobody seemed to really care or make a big deal about it. Blowing your nose is always a good thing to do. And I love this little graphic because it shows to put the tissue in the garbage and then to wash your hands after, or use a hand sanitizer. You can do this, but that's gross. If you're out running or whatever, this might be appropriate but for most people, that's a no-no. And then we have this Buteyko technique for clearing out the sinuses. So we're going to be doing this exercise in just a minute here. I'm going to ask everyone to sit up nice and straight and uncross everything, uncross your ankles, and just start breathing exclusively through your nose right now. If you have to blow your nose before we start, that's fine. That is a good way to get your nose ready for using a Xylitol nasal spray. Also using this technique, this Buteyko technique, is also really good to do before you lay down to go to sleep. The appropriate way to use a Xylitol nasal spray is 2 squirts in each side before bed and first thing in the morning. That's how you prevent any problems from happening. If you are already finding you have a lot of mucus, you can use it as many times as possible. All right, so let's do this Buteyko thing. So I'm going to describe it to you, and then I'm going to show you, and then you can do it while I'm showing you. So it's all about the exhale. So this isn't like in 3rd grade where you take a deep breath in and hold it as long as possible. This is after an exhale. And then you're going to hold your breath and you're going to nod your head to kind of give you a little bit of a distraction. And you're going to hold that breath until you get a very strong urge to breathe. And then you're going to breathe in through the nose and you're going to resume normal nasal breathing afterwards. So it looks like this. You're going to breathe in, breathe out, hold, bob. If your neck hurts, you can also walk around with that. To stimulate that distraction. So, all right, sit up straight, take a small breath in and a small breath out. Hold your nose and bob your head and keep breathing, or hold your breath until you get this really strong urge to breathe. Keep holding, keep holding. Some people hold for 10 seconds, some people hold for 45 seconds. Whatever it is that you want. Keep going. And then when you feel a strong urge to breathe, release the nose, start breathing normally. It should take just a few breaths to get back into normal. And we're going to wait anywhere between 20 and 60 seconds and repeat. It's really effective if done in a group of 6. So let's pretend that was 20 seconds. Take a small breath in again, a normal breath in, a normal breath out. Hold your nose and bob. And hold and hold and hold until you get a really massive discomfort that you really have to breathe. And then when you reach that really distressing point, let go of your nose and take a deep breath of air in. During that breath hold, you're also accumulating nitric oxide. So this is a way to build up some nitric oxide and get a bigger bolus going in. Release your nose and resume normalized breathing through the nose exclusively. We're going to do one more because in my experience, the clients that I have where we teach this to have the first real cleanse after the 3rd attempt. So let's pretend that was at least 20 seconds. Take a small breath in and exhale normally. Pinch your nose, bob your head. It doesn't have to be violent. It can just be a little mild little bobbing. And then when you have that very strong urge to breathe, go ahead and let it go. Now, that's the 3rd one we're going to be doing here today. And I would like to know if you could put it in the chat box for me if you've noticed a difference even with just these 3. You can keep on doing this for the 3 more times if you like. I like to have at least 20 or 20 seconds between. I don't want people to get dizzy or to hyperventilate. You want to recover between, but you want to add a little bit of tension to your body. So let me know how that goes. This is a little accumulation of a couple of studies on the Xylitol nasal spray. And you can see that in the upper right-hand corner there, a 36% increase in airflow after using it twice a day habitually for a couple of weeks. It works really fast, but the results don't last for very long. You might get a relief for an hour or so, but by the second week of using it twice a day, 2 squirts on either side in the morning and at night, by 2 weeks, you're going to feel an increase in airflow. You're going to feel a decrease in your SNOT 20 scores. You're going to find that you're going to be healthier. So just recently, Patrick McGowan, who is the author of the Oxygen Advantage book, the main teacher right now in the United States, at least on the Buteyko method, did a YouTube video on his technique with response as a response to this COVID problem. And he mentioned near the end that he holds his breath when he's in a crowd. And he does that by exhaling, and he holds his breath. You know, when you're doing it yourself, you don't have to pinch your nose, but he holds his breath after an exhale, and he builds up a medium pressure before he breathes that nitric oxide in. Nitric oxide is also helpful in building surfactants in the lungs. So if you know how this COVID virus works, is it stops the production of those surfactants. The surfactants are necessary to keep the flow of mucus in the lungs, and that's how you get these massive plugs up of the surfaces in your lungs. So nitric oxide can be very helpful in that. And so as he's building up this nitric oxide, as he's standing in a crowded bus or a crowded room, he's then inhaling that built up nitric oxide. This just came across our desk just yesterday. LSU, Louisiana State University, in Shreveport, is starting a study looking at nitric oxide as a cure for the COVID-19 patients. So this isn't frou-frou. This is for real. It's part of your body's defense mechanism that has been ignored for almost 100 years. I don't remember even my grandma telling me to breathe with my mouth closed or eat with my mouth closed. So as a clinician, how do you know if your patients are mouth breathing? Because they don't know. They'll lie accidentally. And we don't always have a good view of the adenoids, but we certainly see the tonsils. When I'm looking in someone's throat, which I now know is an airway, who else only looked at throats? Who never saw an airway up until recently? Isn't that crazy? You look in there and you're like, oh my gosh, your tonsils are so gigantic. That is a sign of mouth breathing. Often the patients don't know that their tonsils are gigantic. As the person grows and becomes further and further away from infancy, we can start to see facial developments that are indicative of mouth breathing. This is pretty late stage. We can do something if the kid is 8 or 9 to stop that and get them to start nasal breathing by getting to the root cause of the mouth breathing, but we need to do something. We need to recognize it and act on it. Patients will sometimes come and they'll have dry lips. That's an indication of mouth breathing. Our Sjogren's patients are probably breathing through their mouth more than they think. So that could be something we could help them with. Lip licking is also an indication of mouth breathing. So when we see kids with this bright red line around their lips, that could be something we could help about. For our dental patients, those people that have a lot of decay and we're like, what the heck? It could be that they're mouth breathing. We need to get their mouth closed. We know that mouth breathing, particularly at night, reduces the pH in the oral cavity, making it very, very convenient for the bacteria to grab hold and start up their biofilms and then make an even make a low pH environment even lower. And so we need to get them to get their mouths closed. Look at that bottom study there. That was published in 1890. This is really old, right? I mean, this is stuff that had been lost to antiquity. Don't get confused with perioral dermatitis. That may or may not have anything to do with mouth breathing, but dermatitis is from a contact with some kind of an irritant, and that is not the same as mouth breathing. People with allergies, sometimes they'll argue with you and say, well, I can't breathe through my nose because blah, 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 allergies. People that use xylitol nasal spray twice a day, as I've just described, have been able to get their mouth closed and not be as troubled with allergens as in the past. I talked to a person that was at my course last week, and she did not know about using a nasal spray before bed. She'd been using it during the day, but it had been a game changer in just a couple of days. She has much, much less trouble with the allergens in her area. And when we talk about sleeping and mouth breathing as we're sleeping, there's a lot of conversation lately about using mouth tape. So I'm not going to tell you that you can go ahead and just start people taping their mouths. You need to know something first. You can't just mouth tape people. They can't just do it themselves. The beauty part about mouth taping is that you will rip off the mouth tape if you can't breathe through your nose. So there's that. But we have to do it smartly. We have to do it in a way that's safe for the patient, particularly. We never, ever use duct tape. That's a joke, okay? You do not need to use a 2-inch wide piece of tape, although you can if that's what you have. Most people are okay using the tape in a vertical way. You do not need to cross the tape over your mouth. You're not protecting your bunkmate from vampire attack. You just need to slightly keep your lips together. This is completely inappropriate. These are not ways to tape your mouth closed. This is more appropriate. We're starting to see industry reacting to this problem with mouth tapes that are safe to use. I like to use the Somnifix or regular paper tape. You can see in this photo on the right that the tape is folded over on the left side. So what I do is I take a length of the tape off the roll, I rip off the piece of tape and then fold over the end of the tape that's still on the roll. By doing that, I automatically have a folded over piece of tape that I pulled off. I put it on my lips, and then I have a handle to take the tape off with when it's morning. Now, I have had a lot of people ask me, oh my God, Shirley, what if I have to throw up in the middle of the night? And then I wondered to myself, who throws up in the middle of the night? How often is that a problem? I would think you'd want a doctor for that. But anyway, you take it off. If you feel nauseous, you just grab a hold of the handle and you take it off. It's less than 1 second to take it off. And then we've had some parents get in trouble with authorities for taping their children's mouths closed. So if you don't have access to something like this, it's appropriate to ask the child to put the tape on themselves. You get in a lot less trouble doing it that way. This myotape, so there's another kind of a myotape. So you have to go to myotape.com to get this. This is like kinesio tape, and it's one circle piece that has an opening in the center, and it just lightly holds the lips together. So who shouldn't be using a mouth tape? People with low blood pressure, people with heart problems or breathing problems, severely chapped lips. You know, there's an array. We need to know, as myofunctional therapists, we don't need to know. We can decide, or we can help discover why they're breathing with their mouth open. And we can address that root cause right there. So we're nearing the end here. So I'm going to invite you to ask your questions right now so that you can figure out where the question box is. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about how to promote more nitric oxide in your sinuses. So first of all, we have to get the sinuses clear. We have to get the mucus flowing freely so that it's not stuck and trapped. And we can improve the amount of nitric oxide that is produced by humming. So your basic doing that for between 60 and 100 times a day can improve the release of nitric oxide and increase your sinus volume. So the nitric oxide works also to help reduce the inflammation in the sinuses. And by getting more nitric oxide, you're increasing the sinus volume because you're reducing the swelling. It increases nitric oxide production up to 15 times. So that's pretty amazing. So if you're turning your room around as a dental hygienist or a dental assistant, or if the dentist is having a minute, the dentists don't have a lot of minutes in a day, but when you have a minute, and if you're humming, maybe you can hum a tune, but get it in there. You'll look happier. You'll feel better. I don't know if there are any studies on happiness measurements with respect to humming, but I bet there are. Plus, you get this increase in nitric oxide, plus you get increased sinus volume, plus. So in summary, we have some serious research ongoing into nitric oxide with virus and against this COVID-19. They're looking at it in a number of different ways. We know that respiratory fitness means that you can exercise at your customary pace with your mouth closed. The mouth closed is the appropriate way for the face to be. The lips should be together. If they're not together, we need to figure out why. You can see these animals right here are performing at peak performance levels with their mouths closed. Obligate nasal breathing improves immunity. It builds up nitric oxide and can reduce dental decay for our dental people in the audience. We can stop mouth breathing by getting to the root of the problem. Find out why they're not breathing with their nose. Maybe it is as simple as getting an allergy medication. Maybe it's because their tongue is tied and they have to breathe through their mouth because they can't, their maxilla never grew. You can practice nasal breathing. We can stop nasal breathing by keeping the nose and sinuses clear by any way possible. Essential oils, the nose clearing exercise and sprays. We can also include mouth taping. So let's keep up the no. Thank you for joining me today. We have time for some questions here. Let me bump up here and get the chat box open. Sarah says that she felt that the breathing technique did help open her sinuses and help to relax more. Yes, that's another thing that comes from nasal breathing, is the ability to relax a little bit. I never thought I had any nasal passage blockage, but I feel the air now as I inhale through the nose. Well, there you go, Renee. That's pretty awesome. How many minutes or cycles should a person do the special breathing technique? We want a series of 6. So 6 seems to be the magic number. You see a big release after the 3rd, and then by the 6th, you get a little longevity. People that do that nose clearing exercise are able to breathe through their nose if with a cold for about 45 minutes, and without a cold for a couple of hours. I remember one patient we had, it was during the intake exam, and we were so desperate to give this little kid some help. We asked them to do this nose clearing exercise. So the mother did it together with the child. That's how it works. And after doing it just a few days, the child was able to sleep with their mouth closed for 2 hours. She made a special call to let us know that how that really helped with her son. So that's how easy it is to work. Essential oils. How do I feel about essential oils and humidifiers? If you're in a really, really dry area, I would suggest having a humidifier. Most people in Wisconsin have a humidifier attached to their furnace. It does a lot of really good, but Xylitol nasal spray can be extremely helpful. It has that moisture attraction property to it. It's called hygroscopic. So yes, and essential oils, I'm not a very big essential oil person. I think you have to really know what you're doing in order to use essential oils properly. I think this mass into essential oils has not been extremely helpful. It's been profitable for a lot of people maybe, but I don't know how I'm not all the way there. But some people with that neti stick that I showed you, that's got essential oils in it. RhinoMed also has a gadget that has essential oils in it, and people are getting relief from it. So if it doesn't burn, it's expensive. You could be out a couple of dollars, but for the most part, you could get some benefit. For the downside, you might lose some money if it doesn't work for you. So yes, after 6 cycles, you can get up to, it's been reported to me that you can get up to 2 hours in patients that we have doing it. Yes, you are double checking, and thank you for that. It is amazing. It's an amazing tool. For our dental patients, this is something easy to do right before they come back to the dental chair or in the chair before you start treatment. It will stop that fat tongue from pressing against the mirror. It'll stop the fight with the mirror. It is really an incredible way to help your patients have a better appointment. All right, looks like we're out of questions here. Thank you for the presentation. You're welcome. I love doing it. What about using hydrogen peroxide in the nose neti pot? How does peroxide work in the sinuses? That sounds gross. I'm not going to answer that. I'm not prepared for it. I would encourage you to go to pubmed.gov and search out hydrogen peroxide sinuses and find out if you find anything, and then let me know, because it took me 3 years to talk myself into using the clear nasal spray. That's how much I don't want anything in my nose. So I hope that you all liked it and that you let people know how they can breathe through their nose. My name is Shirley Gutkowski. Thank you to CEA again for offering this platform. And we'll see you all soon, and have a great rest of the day.